All right, good, good, beautiful. So you take sand and fire and put it together and you have glass. And you make, it turns into a liquid. Imagine the sand turns into a liquid and then you stick a pipe in there and gather it up like honey and bring it out and blow down there and you blow a shape that over the centuries, glass blowers have learned to make it into an incredible array of forms. And I've been lucky enough to come along at the right time, at the right place, to be able to expand many of the forms that were made throughout this 2,000-year history. I was using just human breath going down into this miraculous material, blowing it up, pushing its limits, making it as thin as I could, getting it so hot that it would almost collapse and begin to move. So I was pushing the edge of thinness and collapsibility and making new forms. I think it was about 1977 that I was visiting the Washington State Historical Society and looking at their Indian basket collection. And it dawns on me that, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to try to make these baskets out of glass? A lot of the baskets are old and kind of crumply and they're not always straight and firm. And so I got into my mind that somehow I wanted to make them asymmetrical. And so first I would bang them with a paddle to beat them up a little bit. But I soon learned that if I just used the heat of the furnace and the fire, that I could get the same kind of movement from the fire itself, and it was more beautiful. That was really the breakthrough series for me. Probably the most innovational thing I'd ever done in glass was to begin to form glass with fire, with gravity, with heat, with centrifugal force. Now, glass is defined as a supercooled liquid, and it's transparent, like water. And so the idea that the objects end up looking like they came from the sea is no accident. It is almost like water itself. So when you're making and blowing and forming the glass, if you want to push it towards an organic form that as if it came from the sea, it happens just naturally. I was making the baskets in the 70s, and at one point I wanted to make the baskets thinner. They were already quite thin. So I stuffed them into what we call an optical mold, which is a ribbed mold that ends up making the glass sort of like corrugated cardboard in terms of structure. Theoretically, that would allow you to make it thinner because it's stronger. And when I did that, of course, that optical mold or that corrugated, ribbed feeling made it look like a shell. So, you know, as soon as I did it, one thought shell. And then, you know, I liked the idea that it was a shell. And so changed the name of, I didn't really change the name from baskets to Seaforms. It's just that the baskets became the Seaforms. And then, of course, we extended and pushed it to a more aquatic feeling. You know, there's no end to that, too. I mean, I could literally make Seaforms probably for the rest of my life. And that's a series that I have continued to make because you can always take that in a different way, in a different direction.
I got a thin bottom. Watch your feet. I think after I did Garfield Park in Chicago, that was such a fun installation to do, and it was great working with the plants and the glass together. I think after that I decided I would do some sort of plant-like forms, and then knowing that each piece could go in individually in a garden, or they could go in as a group or as a huge installation. So I was going to do a large installation in the Tacoma Art Museum that was going to be a takeoff on the Jerusalem show. They were going to show a tower, a moon, the star. But somewhere after starting down that road, I changed my mind abruptly and decided to do an exhibition of what I call Mille Fiori, which means 1,000 flowers in Italian.
This is called Mille Fiori, and the way this would have been done, it would have been built in my studio in Seattle. In this particular case, we would have marked the pieces or photographed the pieces so they went together in the same way when they got here. Unlike the chandeliers, which they would not have been numbered. They would just, who's ever building a chandelier would probably look at a photograph and try to get it to look like what we did in the studio. But this one here, because it has to have steel rods that come up and go inside these tall pieces, so there are holes in there in that platform, which is black plexiglass, and they have to go back in the right place.
Techniques that I've been using for the Mille Fiori are similar to the techniques I've always used, which is fire, gravity, centrifugal force, not using very many tools, not handling the glass, letting the furnace do its magic with the glass.
I think that optical mold is the way to go.
So it's really a question of working with the glass blowers, just making pieces that were hollow. It didn't have to look like a plant, but very often they do.
Yeah, that's nice in that end. Maybe make them taller. Yeah, it looked good, didn't it? Yeah. Of course, the fact that they end up asymmetrical is good. Should we try one that's one more gather?
Sure. One more gather. Can you make it a little bigger, please? Okay. Thank you. Keep it moving, buddy.
Don't bend them over too far.
Okay.
They look a little funny if they're pointing down to the ground. No, it still looks good. Talk about a flower.
Yeah. Can we go into the length?
Yeah, let's try to get them longer if we can.
People, have asked what inspired me to do the Fiori. It wasn't so much trying to replicate plants as it was a way to work with all the techniques that we've learned for the last 35 or 40 years. So as you look at the Fiori, you'll see all the other series of my work in there somewhere, I think.
For the last few years, I've been making an installation that probably holds hundreds of pieces of glass inside a wooden boat. And it's one of my favorite installations. I was in Finland about 15 years ago, blowing glass at a beautiful factory called Nuutijärvi. I had a crew of about 30 people, and we worked with the Finns, making my pieces. And at one point, I had a lot of them stored out by this river. And I was standing by the river, I was looking at the bridge, and I was just felt like throwing one of these big pieces into the water from the bridge. Wow. And it was only like 15 feet high. And so I did, bingo, and it worked, nothing broke. I threw another one in, bingo, bingo, bingo. And I had the Finnish teenagers who were helping me get in one of their boats and take another boat with them and go down and pick up the pieces out of the river, because the river had current, and it was they were getting away from me. And they brought them back, and they looked so good in that boat when they brought them back that eventually, not right away, but eventually I decided to do an installation in a boat. And really, what I've always been interested probably in is space. Even when I made the macchias, my interest was always in space. So I was thinking not of the object itself, but how the object would look in a room. I had seen a chandelier in Barcelona when I was traveling in a restaurant. I went into this Italian restaurant, and there was a chandelier hanging at eye level because it had a low ceiling, and it was really beautiful. And when you sat down to eat, it was right above eye level. So you looked underneath the chandelier when you were sitting down, and it acted as sort of a centerpiece for the table. So I loved this idea of hanging a chandelier at eye level, and it triggered something that said, I now can make a chandelier because it doesn't have to be functional. And so I made a chandelier for the Seattle Art Museum that looked sort of like yellow balloons. It was made up of about 500 parts, very simple forms that a beginning glassblower could make almost. But we did it quickly. We did it in the 10-day period, and that began the chandelier series. And I started making chandeliers regularly, and over the next couple of years I made about 25 chandeliers. Not one of them ever sold. And people started telling me, hey, listen, we got to quit using all our resources here to make chandeliers because we're running out of money and nobody wants these chandeliers you're making anyway. And I just couldn't understand why nobody wanted these chandeliers, because I really thought they really worked in space. So I kept making the chandeliers in spite of their lack of success. And, all of a sudden, somebody bought one, and then somebody bought another one, and they started selling. And fortunately, that turned out to be that people did like them. It just took them a couple of years to want them. And that often happens with my work. I'll start a series, and it'll take a couple of years before people can understand it, or maybe they have to see it over and over. I don't know what it really takes.
This is important. Make them as big as we can. Bigger, the better.
I don't know why I work so large. I very often push a series to its maximum size. I think sometimes I do it just to keep the glassblowers at the very edge of their technical ability, to keep the tension high, to make it exciting, to make it so that we don't know whether it's going to break or not break. If you know exactly what you're doing and you can make it every time, it's not going to be interesting. It has to have this tension if the pieces are going to be good. And so we constantly push ourselves. I push them, they push me. I try to get them to go beyond what they can do. It's more interesting that way.
How those are put together for me, it's really more about architecture than about objects, and how I work in space. The thrill of having this, room sort of overtake you in a way, so that you're immersed in that type of work. That's what I like to do.